Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography and making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent by being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is on the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Margaret, do we have any substitutes, please?
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Denham for Councillor Norfolk and Councillor Scott for Councillor Kimberley. And we also have apologies from the Managing Director, David Blake. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, and do we have any public participation, please?
Yes, Chair, we do. We have Lorna Connolly with us who will speak shortly. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any declarations of interest, please? Okay, then in that case, I'd like to move to our public speaker. Lorna, would you like to come and sit down? That's it. And if you turn your microphone on, you've got 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Lorna Connolly. I've lived in Worcester since 1990, and in the last 36 years I've lived in 3 different properties all around the Battenhall Hall Park area. When my children were young, we enjoyed quality family time together, enjoying that beautiful space in the park, playing games, picnics, meeting friends, practicing football, practicing gymnastics. When they grew up, they each had a daughter, and I spent many times in the park doing much the same activities. Once they were old enough for school, the time was right for me to get a dog. So off I went, walks in the park, many happy walks in the park, through that lovely green space. I now have a 3-year-old grandson. When Mum went back to work, I began to look after him, and he loved the freedom of being able to toddle round the park safely. Then the pump track arrived. I can see there'll be rolling of eyes, sighs of here we go again, but I'm not here to bang on about antisocial behaviour in the pump track, but I'm here to talk to you about how it's generally impacted my life as a single person and local resident. I live on Woodbridge Close, which directly backs onto where the park is and ultimately is the closest road to the pump track. Of the occupants of the 50 to 60 houses in that close, we have 4 young teenagers, a 5-year-old and a toddler. 80% of the remaining residents are in the over 70s age group. Last summer was the first summer of the pump track. One of the things that drew me to move into my house, despite its small garden, was the actual vast green space behind me. A peaceful haven to enjoy walks, go out and enjoy nature. Most evenings through the summer months, we would enjoy an evening walk, sit on the patio for dinner and enjoy the peace and quiet. Not last summer. I can count on one hand the number of times we were able to do that. And peaceful weekends in the garden, they're a thing of the past. We can also no longer sleep with a bedroom window open in hot weather because of the noise. There's constant screaming, shouting, swearing, and loud music until very late hours, and even very early hours. There are motorbikes using the track after dark and riding at speed through the park at high revs. I've been intimidated by groups of youths, followed by them, and even taunted by a lad on an e-scooter who I hadn't even spoken to. He'd just decided it was my turn, and off he came. He scooted past me, he stopped, he turned, he stared at me. He waited as I walked, scooted off again, and he just kept repeating that, the full length of the park for no reason. He then stopped virtually outside my house. and I was so frightened of him knowing where I lived and frightened of any further intimidation or worse actions that I actually carried on walking for another 20 minutes. That's wrong. How is that right that a local resident is too scared to go home? So I no longer walk in Battenhall Park. After all the years of living here, it has been decimated by users of the track, and it's heartbreaking. It was a beautiful space before that everyone could enjoy. I've got some pictures. These are the pictures of what it used to look like, what we had. Lovely. These are now the photos of what we've got. Mud bath. How is that an improvement? So the point of telling you all this tonight is about the impact on my life and many of the neighbours, and I just want to say that you all made a decision in this room to site the pump track in an area that local residents told you was unsuitable. Every concern and issue that they said is happening regularly. That single decision has had such a negative impact on the lives of local residents. It was a bad decision. You were asked to defer so further research could be undertaken and chose to put it there, but still you did it. You didn't have any concerns. So I'm here now today to ask you, going forward, to be more mindful when you make decisions. The decisions made in this room have a much further impact than you actually think. It's too late for me and my neighbours now, and the people who live in the surrounding roads. But if this helps save somebody else the misery that we've had, then at least that's something. I don't know if any of you have visited the pump track recently, but I really think that maybe you should, because it will be an eye-opener. I'm not professional, I haven't got a printed copy for you, but if you do want a copy, I do have a copy in the hope that you can go away and think about what I've actually said. It really has impacted my life in a negative way. But thank you for listening.
Thank you for speaking. Officers will write to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now we move on to look at the minutes of the last agenda, the last minutes. So okay. Okay, so we'll go through it page by page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. And page 9. Okay, you happy for me to sign that? Lovely, thank you very much. Okay. Next we move on to the review of the Shrub Hill Quarter Supplementary Planning Document. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This item relates to the Shrub Hill Quarter Supplementary Planning Document. This is a relatively light-touch review of this supplementary planning document that is specific to this site within Worcester City. You'll appreciate that there are a number of supplementary planning documents on your agenda this evening, and there is going to be some repetition to what I'm advising you of this evening, so I apologise in advance for that. The current SPD was adopted in September 2024 and is based on earlier master planning work that identifies a whole series of opportunities and constraints for this part of the city. The SPD sets out a framework against which planning applications in the future are to be considered. The current SPD was adopted under policy SWDP 44.4 of the 2016 South Worcestershire Development Plan. As you'll be aware, it's expected that the South Worcestershire Development Plan review will be adopted later this month. That's important because to ensure that a supplementary planning document can be given full weight in planning decisions, it must be kept up to date and consistent with the development plan that is in operation at the time. Therefore, this and a number of other supplementary planning documents need to be reviewed, updated, consulted upon, and then re-adopted against the South Worcestershire Development Plan review. We have a limited time frame to work within to carry out all of that work and report these documents back to you for adoption against the South Worcestershire Development Plan review before the end of June. And that's why we're having to get on the front foot with these SPDs actually before you've made a decision on the South Worcestershire Development Plan review. This is not the way that we would normally operate, but I hope it's clear why we're having to work in this particular way. So the SPD needs to be re-adopted in due course against policy SWDPR 69. In the case of this SPD, it hasn't been possible in the time available to rework a draft of the document. We need to work with both the County Council and AR Urbanism to do that, and that's why you have a schedule of proposed changes at Appendix 1 to the covering report as far as this SPD is concerned. So the recommendation in two parts is asking you to approve the draft SPD for public consultation lasting 5 weeks, and to authorise Head of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee to make any necessary minor amendments to the draft SPD prior to publication for the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Happy to take any questions? Councillor Gregson.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, my only question is around the is about Sheriffsgate, really. The removal of the reference to the Sheriffsgate development, and I just wondered, factually correct in terms of that development, but no indication of what's going to replace it other than what's currently there, which is nothing. So, as this is a planning document, is there not some kind of outline notion of what ought to be in there, regardless of whether or not which organisation is going to deliver it?
Through you, Chair, on that particular part of the Shrub Hill Quarter, it's difficult to predict what might come forward, and the SPD can't introduce new policy, but it can explain how policy in the development plan is going to be applied. I think the advice I would give is that the policy itself within the SWDP review is robust enough to cater for almost any eventuality in terms of planning applications coming forwards. The update to the SPD is, to all intents and purposes, trying to be a factual update and not to go further than an SPD can. Thank you.
Councillor Pingree.
My question was essentially the same question about Sheriffsgate. Would it be possible to get an update on Sheriffsgate at some point? It doesn't have to be in this meeting, but just more generally about where we're at with that development.
Through you, Chair, again, as soon as there's something that we can share with you, then we will do, but we're very much waiting to see what happens as much as you are. Thank you.
Councillor Denham.
So just to be clear, so in terms of, because the supplementary planning document that has been adopted and that's been signed off, because no, I do attend the Shrub Hill Quarter Steering Group, so that the sort of the design principles of that are being retained. They're not being consulted on or altered. Just to be clear about that, because quite a lot of consultation and a lot of engagement took place around that, and that, you know, the vision of, you know, particularly, you know, the route down from the station, and, you know, a vision for what might be built on that site is quite important.
Thank you. Just to reassure members, there is no watering down of the SPD in terms of vision, aims, objectives, and design quality that we're expecting in this part of the city. Is very much just a factual update. Thank you.
Okay, I can't see any further questions. So in that case, we will move to the vote, which is that this committee approves the draft SPD for the Shrub Hill Quarter and authorises the Head of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of PED to make any necessary minor amendments to the Shrub Hill Quarter SPD prior to public consultation. Can I see a show of hands in favour, please? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now we move on to the review of the air quality supplementary planning document. Lots of us will have seen this many times at many committees, so thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate this will be familiar to most, if not all of you. So briefly, again, the current air quality SPD was adopted as recently as September 2025 against the current SWDP. It will be necessary to ensure that this supplementary planning document carries full weight in planning decision-making, to ensure that it's reviewed, updated, consulted upon, and then re-adopted, but against SWDPR 41 going forwards. So the recommendation, similarly, to approve the draft SPD for public consultation, again lasting 5 weeks, and to delegate to the Head of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair to make any necessary minor amendments to the draft SPD prior to its publication for public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Are there any questions on the floor? Councillor Pingree.
Yeah, I just have one question, and it's about a bit of text on, it's digitally on page 70, but it's, I think the physical copy, it's page 64, which is about the aims and objectives of this SPD. And one of the aims and objectives is to provide transparency and consistency to developers, landowners and the community on the basis for identifying air quality impact and mitigation requirements for new developments. And it says it's not possible to monitor that aim. And I just want to know a little bit more about why it's not possible to monitor that aim. It feels like we could be getting feedback from those people about whether we are providing transparency and consistency.
Through you, Chair, could I ask Councillor Pingree just to direct me again to the relevant page or paragraph?
Yeah,
thank you.
It's page 70 digitally when you're in the full pack, which is page 64, it says it at the top. I'm a big number. But it also says page 44 as well, which, if that helps too.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to take that one away, consult my colleagues in Worcestershire Regulatory Services and come back to you outside of the meeting, if I may, and share the response with all members.
Okay, I'm sure there's a reason for it, yeah.
Councillor Denham.
Sorry, is it table 2 that you're looking at? Yes. And the first line, to ensure that any new development.
I think it's the last one.
The last one.
Sorry, can I remind councillors to talk through the chair, please? Thank you.
I was just endeavouring to clarify the point. Okay, I was looking at the wrong line. Apologies.
Councillor Wilmore.
I think I interpreted it differently to you, and I think it's the problem of having aims and objectives in the same column because they're not the same thing. An aim is your overarching aim and your objectives are the step to achieve that aim. And I thought that was an objective and not an aim. So to provide the transparency was the objective.
Can you clarify, Duncan?
It's clearly possible to monitor and ensure that planning officers receive necessary training on the adoption of the SPD. But the first bit, in terms of to provide transparency, consistency, I can see that there's a vagueness to that Worcestershire Regulatory Services might feel that it's not possible to monitor that in the same way as other objectives are measured. But as I said a moment ago, I can take that away and just seek some clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I recall when this was being taken through the early stages of the Worcester Regulatory Services, when the environmental health officers were reporting on air pollution and why it was important to have an overall strategy. And that's the document which has now got formed into the SPD after it's been documented. At the time, some issues raised about the source of pollution, and the air quality management plan and this SPD necessarily concentrates on nitrous oxides, which are generated mostly by vehicular pollution. There's a growing problem in parts of urban Britain, and Worcester is no exception, in some parts of Worcester, of pollution from wood-burning stoves which are installed retrospectively in households. Would the officer like to comment on that?
I'm certainly aware of the issue. In many cases, that doesn't require planning permission to be applied for from the local planning authority. So typically it would be something that is investigated by Worcestershire Regulatory Services to see whether a statutory nuisance is being caused. But as I say, not specific to planning.
But to clarify, Duncan, we are, Worcester City is a smoke-free zone, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and covered by the air quality management plan.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. This is a second document that is requiring a 5-week public consultation, and we've got 2 more to come. Are they going to be running at the same time, or are they going to be staggered? Because throwing 4 documents of meaty nature on the public all at once seems, it could mean that people don't actually, not able to put as much in if they're having to deal with 4 topics rather than 1 at a time. So how's it going to be spaced?
It's very unfortunate that we find ourselves in this position. We either undertake this work and carry out the public consultation to try and achieve what we need to achieve by the end of June, or not. Inevitably, there will at least be some overlap. It's likely that some of these SPDs will be of more interest to some than others, and some may have a particular interest in either the Shrub Hill part of the city, air quality, affordable housing, etc. But for those that have an interest in all of them, then it will be a case of them responding to them in quick succession.
Councillor Denham.
Thank you very much. I note in the covering report, paragraph 2.5, that the SPD will also be considered and adopted for use by Wychhaven and Malvern Hills district councils, although they're not, don't have an air quality management area. Is that a new addition? And is that part of, if you like, preparing us or taking us towards a future unitary council?
Through you, Chair, it's not something which is new. There are certain locations within those districts that are cause for concern, but not to the extent that would currently justify applying an air quality management plan or designating an AQMA to those areas. One in particular in Malvern Hills district is causing concern. So this is an example of them being proactive and utilising the same guidance that we're using in Worcester, and just part of an area of growing concern, really. It's not linked at all to local government reorganisation, but as you've seen, some of the SPDs are South Worcestershire wide, and the intention is for all 3 councils to adopt them, but some are specific to Worcester. Thank you.
Duncan, can you comment on where we are with the committee cycle and the other districts, and if they've already gone through this process and approved it, or if we're the first in the process, if you know, please? Thank you.
So Worcester is the first in the process as far as what's before you this evening. Again, because of the limited time available and the need to get on with this work, then the developer contributions supplementary planning document will be reported to Policy and Resources Committee rather than this committee. And that's just a product of needing to really make progress with these particular pieces of work. I acknowledge it's not ideal, but we need to make sure that these are updated, readopted, so that we can continue to rely on them in decisions that we make on planning applications or, in some cases, planning enforcement.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor De Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Just relating back to the point that Councillor Barnes raised, I think quite rightly, about these all hitting everybody at once. So I have 2 questions, really. Do we have a view of what the average or the normal sort of response rate we would expect? And therefore, would we be able to see if hitting everybody all at once with these things is causing a lack of response? And if we do find ourselves in that position and we think it's worth giving a bit more time, is there leeway for some of these earlier consultations to be extended? Is that something that you might consider if you think it's worthwhile?
There really isn't the opportunity and the time available to extend the public consultation period. It's worth bearing in mind that none of these supplementary planning documents are completely new and a first draft. So, for example, there will be members of the public that the general public that take an interest in things like the shopfronts supplementary planning document, but that particular one isn't substantially changed compared to the document that was consulted upon very, very recently, earlier this year, in fact. And in that instance, really, it's just the references to policies and which development plan. So the response rates do vary. We tend not to receive very high response rates to supplementary planning documents. The development industry take an interest in them, but there is nothing particularly out of the ordinary in these supplementary planning documents, but they do very, very importantly supplement and expand upon policy in the South Worcestershire Development Plan and Plan Review that aids both our decision making but also our ability to defend our decisions on planning matters if they are challenged.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions, so we'll move to the recommendation, which is the committee approves the draft air quality SPD as set out in Appendix 1 for a 5-week consultation and authorises the Head of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of PED to make any necessary minor amendments to the air quality supplementary planning document prior to publication. Can I see some hands in favour, please? Okay, that's unanimous, thank you. Okay. You had some water, Duncan.
Thank you.
It's now the review of the shopfront and signage SPD. Thank you. Sorry.
The affordable housing.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. The Affordable Housing Supplementary Planning document, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this one is a slight exception. This supplementary planning document was adopted as far back as April 2016, shortly after the current SWDP was adopted, and that was February 2016. The current SPD was written in relation to policy SWDP 15 on affordable housing. This one has been reviewed, updated in relation to new policy SWDPR 19. So we will all have to become familiar with different policy numbers. But that aside, the SPD sets out the Council's approach to securing affordable housing, guidance on legal arrangements, design of affordable housing as part of wider residential development schemes, and associated matters like viability, vacant building credit, etc. So, in a very similar vein, it needs to be reviewed, as we've done, updated, consulted upon before we can re-adopt it against the South Worcestershire Development Plan review. So the recommendation itself is consistent in two parts. First of all, to approve the draft SPD for public consultation for 5 weeks, and to authorise Head of Planning and Economic Development, again in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair, to make any necessary minor amendments before publication for consultation. Could I just take a moment? This is one of those supplementary planning documents that is a joint document. It ensures that the 3 South Worcestershire councils follow a consistent approach to the securing of affordable housing. We have, since publishing the agenda, noticed a couple of typographical errors and things like that. And it's just important. That second limb to the recommendation just allows us, in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair, to just go and correct those so that we don't receive consultation responses that are pointing out typographical errors to us. That's not a good use of anyone's time. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open up the floor to questions. Councillor Pingree.
I have quite a few questions on this one, and should I do one at a time, because they're all in different parts in the document. So the first one is about page 84 of the digital copy. It's point 2.8. It's also on page 78 of the physical copy, I think, if you'll get that one as well. So it's 2.8, which says, each local authority has the duty to prepare a tenancy strategy following the enactment of the Localism Act 2011. Malvern Hills and Wychavon councils updated their joint tenancy strategy in 2019. It indicated that there were 1,531 people on the housing waiting list in Malvern Hills and 2,892 in Wychavon. And Worcester City updated their tenancy strategy in 2017, and at the time there were 2,773 people on the housing waiting list. Now, feel free to stop me if this is more of a question for communities than it is for place and economic development, but I was just wondering, when are we going to update our tenancy strategy? Have we already updated it? And how many people are currently on the housing waiting list?
To the best of my knowledge, the affordable housing waiting list has been updated more recently than you just quoted. I'm not able to give you the exact date, but that's a piece of work that's been done more recently in relation to some of the affordable housing that's coming forward on the urban extensions, where that's primarily to meet Worcester City's needs, even though those sites leapfrog the administrative boundary. I can certainly, after this meeting, find out precisely when that was updated and what the most up-to-date waiting list numbers are.
That's great. Is it also worth putting that into this document as well? Or is that not needed for this?
Through you, Chair, it's not necessary for the document, but it's something that can be fed into this process through the consultation and then be reflected amongst many other changes I'm sure will be suggested before the draft is brought back for further consideration and adoption.
If I may, other questions. This question is more generally about the developments, which is obviously as part of the SWDP, we've done some developments now. We've had some successful ones since the start of it, and it'd be really useful to know, and not necessarily in this document or even in this meeting, but at some point, about how successful we were in getting the percentage of affordable housing that we wanted. So I know in some developments, obviously as part of the SWDP, it will say, okay, we want 30% affordable housing, say, but within reason of the developer, and then the developer might come back and say, oh, actually, we can only do 20% affordable housing. And then, but I'd really like to know from the actual setting to the completion of the housing, what percentage affordable housing do we actually end up with? Because then you have a whole other process, which is when they actually come to sell the houses, are they still affordable at that point? And I think it'd be nice to know whether, essentially, are we being successful in, and what impact is it having?
So thank you for that question. For the purposes of this evening, we are generally successful in achieving policy compliant schemes, but most members, I'm sure, will be aware that on the urban extensions, the policy requirement is 40%, but because of viability considerations, each of the three councils agreed that the percentage of affordable housing that would be secured would be 20%, that the development wouldn't be viable with any more than 20%. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that whilst we're often drawn to the headline percentage, what can sometimes be equally important, if not more important, is the tenure split. So sometimes you can increase the headline percentage, but you have to compromise on the tenure. We know that in the three districts, but particularly within Worcester, the greatest need is for social rented accommodation. So in the South Worcestershire Development Plan review that's been through the examination process, the preferred tenure split is 70% social rent and 30% home ownership, typically shared ownership. And it's really important that we communicate that priority to developers, because apart from anything else, it's the social rented accommodation that impacts on development viability the greatest. So we really do prioritise that, because that's the element that goes towards meeting Worcester residents' need, which happens to be greatest. Thank you.
Did you have another question, Councillor Pingree?
I've got one more, if that's okay, which is about a point on it's page 87 of the physical copy, which is 93 if you're doing it digitally. And it's 3.19, which talks about, requires, SWDPR 19 requires landowners and or developers to enter legal agreements to provide affordable housing. Applicants for planning permission will generally need to demonstrate that housing will remain permanently affordable, or in exceptional circumstances, subsidy recycled and for all sites. It goes on, but my main point is about how do you ensure that it remains permanently affordable? What measures are put in place for that?
So the key point there is that it's not good enough that it's only affordable for the first occupier. So if that affordable property is sold or transferred, it needs to be affordable for the second, the third occupant or family. In the vast majority of cases, the affordable housing is transferred to a registered provider or housing association, and it's through the registered provider that that affordability is protected. The legal agreement includes a number of standard clauses that make sure that the registered provider is bound by those, and because they become the successor in title and the new owner once they've been transferred from the house builder, what that part of the supplementary planning document is saying is that that is not something that we're looking to negotiate over. That really is vital and a showstopper for the council, that we value that greatly. So again, when a developer is looking to agree a price for land, what we set out in our supplementary planning documents, they will factor in to what they're prepared to offer for the land. And most of these things have an impact on development viability. And what we're saying is that if we are upfront with these planning obligation requirements, then that should also be reflected in the land value. Thank you.
Councillor Denham.
Thank you, and I mean, thank you to Councillor Pingree for kind of having looked at some of the detail within this and raising the question. So does that mean that these properties are within the SPD, that the right to buy is kind of removed from the equation? Because certainly, you know, in the past, right to buy from social landlords has ended up in properties then being, you know, commercially sold on. I know we've even got examples in the city of them becoming Air B&Bs, which is absolutely not, you know, the intention or the approach for affordable housing that we really, really need.
So I think what you're referring to is sometimes described as staircasing. So in the case of home ownership, shared ownership properties, someone will initially start off with a share that they own and a share that they're paying rent on, and there is an ability to increase the equity that they have in that property. Generally, that's seen as a positive thing, and for someone to staircase at least to 80%, if not 100%, the theory is that they might be able to then step out of affordable housing into an open market home because of the equity that they've built up. I'm told that that doesn't happen as often as we might think, that typically people retain the level of equity that they started off with. But it can be an issue, but because it's not commonplace, it tends not to be in practice. Clearly with social rented accommodation, then the Section 106 legal agreement typically says for a property that started off as being social rent or affordable rent, it needs to stay as that tenure for its lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask a question. Page 77 on this physical copy, the second table at 2.6. It's talking about the overall mix of tenure in Worcester. I'm unfortunately only too well aware that there is significant need for 3-bedroom and above houses, and I wonder if there's any opportunity to increase those percentages at all. It seems that, I mean, are these percentages actually linked to the known need? So anyway, that's my question.
Generally speaking, they are. So typically, there is a pattern to where the greatest need is for social rent, affordable rent, shared ownership. And what you're seeing in this table reflects that. But it's worth me adding that what's within the supplementary planning document is the council's starting position, and it doesn't mean that there can't be a degree of negotiation on a site-by-site basis. But what the supplementary planning document is trying to do is give developers, house builders, a degree of confidence and certainty that they know where that conversation, that negotiation is likely to start. But our housing team colleagues have an opportunity to review those in greatest need, priority need, and that will influence what their ask might be on a particular site in a particular part of the city. So it's important to start somewhere, but it doesn't mean that we can't depart from this as the local planning authority if we're satisfied that there is a justifiable reason for doing that. Thanks.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful of one of the previous subjects here, Sheriff's Gate, where originally we asked for 40% affordable, then we were knocked down to 20%, then it became 10%, and then it wasn't the first tranche that was going to have any affordable at all, but it was going to be about tranche 3 or 4 would be the affordable housing. And of course, that is now not going to happen because the whole thing's collapsed. So we've ended up with no affordable housing at present, where we were promised at least some. So how can we try and make sure that that sort of situation doesn't happen, where they can front load all the profits, even though they seem to have failed, so that we actually do protect future market for affordable?
The way that we ensure that we are squeezing the maximum amount of affordable housing out of a particular development with the best tenure split that best suits the need as it exists within Worcester is by bringing in specialist viability expertise and advice that we as a council commission, and the consultant is working for the planning department, but the costs of securing that advice are paid for by the developer. That shouldn't be a cost that falls to this council. We very successfully did that in the case of the urban extensions, and you might be thinking, well, to go from 40% to 20% doesn't seem very successful. If I say to you that at one point the developer was suggesting that they'd only be able to deliver 2%, 20% was a pretty good outcome. And some would say that actually, in light of the viability pressures, it was probably always going to be 20% eventually. But we held out, we didn't accept 2%. None of the 3 South Worcestershire councils accepted 2%, and we were satisfied that 20% was an appropriate level for that scale of development. So bringing in that specialist advice is important. Making sure that 106 agreements are drafted in a very robust way, so that if there is a phasing arrangement, that we know exactly how that operates, and in some cases requiring a bond so that if something unforeseen were to happen, there is an alternative way of clawing something back out of the development. But clearly, we never have a crystal ball to know where in a particular economic cycle we might be when a site comes forward. So a planning permission might last for 3 years, but in the case of the urban extensions, we can expect those to be built out over 10, 12, 15 years. The supplementary planning document talks about deferred contingent obligations, so a review mechanism. That can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. It can be advantageous to the council because of what I've just mentioned about not having a crystal ball, but it can sometimes give a developer an opportunity to come back to renegotiate. If a developer is trying to renegotiate and that ends up being resolved as part of some kind of tribunal arrangement, it doesn't mean that that comes back in front of a planning committee or in front of a planning inspector like an original planning application does. So there is a line of thought and argument that actually we're better to secure an appropriate level of affordable housing at the outset and then stick with that and not have a review mechanism. And that was the view that the three councils took with the urban extensions. So the role of the supplementary planning document is to set out the council's approach to things like that, but it will still be a case of each case on its merits, and we will still need to discuss these sorts of issues with those specialist advisors, with our housing teams, etc., depending on what evidence we have of need at a particular point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any more further questions, so in that case we'll move to the recommendation. It's very similar to the other ones we've been having, which is that this committee approved the Affordable Housing SPD, set out in Appendix 1 for a 5-week public consultation and authorises the Head of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of PED to make necessary minor amendments to the draft Affordable Housing SPD prior to publication. Can I see hands in favour, please? Okay, and that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Duncan, are you ready for review of shop fronts and signage SPD, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I think I can keep this one quite brief. This is a light touch update review. It's really just factual updates in terms of our position with the South Worcestershire Development Plan review. Some of you may have spotted that this particular SPD is not hanging off one particular development plan policy, it's hanging off 3. So that's SWDP 21, 2 policies. SWDPR 28 on design and SWDPR 35 in relation to amenity. So again, for this SPD to continue to be attributed full weight in planning decisions, we need to go through this process. This particular SPD is specific to Worcester, and again, the recommendation is that the draft is approved for public consultation for a period of 5 weeks, and then that second limb to the recommendation just seeking authorisation and delegation to make any necessary minor amendments prior to the document being published for public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor Gregson, please.
Given that this was so recently developed, could I ask why we didn't write stuff into it at that time that facilitated the fact that we knew there was going to be a review of the SWDPR and therefore could have avoided a 10-week consultation on the document?
I had anticipated this question. So, we'd prepared the current supplementary planning document and wanted to bring it into effective operation as quickly as possible. And in the time between adopting the current SPD and this evening, this document has already been very, very helpful in negotiating applications and also supporting planning enforcement work. We did not want to count our chickens as far as the SWDP review was concerned. So at the time, we thought it was prudent to get the current document adopted so that we could start referring to it in decision making. Apologies, and it's unfortunate that this has come round so quickly. As I say, we didn't want to count our chickens. It's proving very effective already, and we don't want to get to June and find that we can no longer place the weight on this document that we have been already. But yes, it's not something we would have ideally chosen to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Duncan. I'm pleased that you're going out to public consultation again, because the public really like to read this report. And it's triggered quite a lot of comments from residents who know and love the city like we all do, and because shop fronts are the shop front for the city. Everyone sees them. They're the front face of buildings, and they're what you've noticed most, and so they do excite a lot of comment. The development of shop fronts and adverts for shops it's quite complicated in terms of planning legislation. Some things don't need planning permission at all. Some things have got what I think is called deemed consent, and some things you need a specific application for. You mentioned that this is helping with enforcement, and it is to the enforcement officers that we often turn when somebody's complaining about a garish shop front with inappropriate lighting or a scruffy display. I'm not sure that needs planning permission, or even general neglect. But the enforcement officers, as always in the city, are very helpful in saying what it is we can do and how far we can go. Could you expand a bit more on that aspect in terms of how this SPD, this very beautifully produced document, will help us produce even beautiful shop fronts and the enforcement actions around them?
Thank you for the question. So, this SPD covers shop fronts, but also signage. It's trying to span both of those topics. And I think hopefully we would agree it's doing that very effectively. The shop front itself, alterations to a shop front or new shop fronts typically are what's classed as operational development and will require planning permission. Again, as you will also be aware, some shop owners or their tenants will make changes without seeking approval first. And sometimes what's said to us is, in someone's defence, how was I to know? By having an adopted supplementary planning document like this, well illustrated, easy to understand and gain an appreciation of what the City Council expects, we can hold that up and wave it and say, we've been proactive, this is what we've produced, this is why you should have known. When it comes to dealing with applications, including retrospective applications, the supplementary planning document is our way of adopting a consistent approach, and in some cases requiring retrospective changes, requiring something to be put back as it was or made better. So that's the value of a supplementary planning document like this. Similarly with advertisements, the Town and Country Planning Control of Advertisement regulations go back to 2007. And the regulations include what Councillor Scott has referred to as those things that have automatic consent, that have deemed consent, and don't require somebody to come to the City Council and apply for advertisement consent. And then that deemed consent regime sits across a number of classes of advertisement. Typically, the very straightforward adverts are those that might be a brass plaque outside a doctor's surgery, something like that. It might be the sort of signage that you see outside a construction site, which gives details of the architect, the main contractor, health and safety information, things like that. And there are a number of different classes of advertisement that have this automatic consent. Some forms of advertisement can even be illuminated and still benefit from deemed consent. But what we also try to do within the supplementary planning document is explain it's not just about the shopfront design itself. If someone is going to include lighting, the type of lighting that we would expect to see and the type of lighting that we would expect not to see, and that all contributes to the overall quality of the individual shopfront, but also cumulatively the streets within the city that are so important to why Worcester is a place where people come to visit, enjoy the heritage of the city, etc., etc. So that's why we need others to appreciate how precious this is. So the SPD doesn't seek to take away any deemed consent, but it seeks to explain where express consent is required, where an application is required, the design standards that we're looking for. Where that benefits the city, but benefits the city council in terms of process, if we refuse a planning application or refuse an application for advertisement consent, and then that decision is challenged, perhaps by way of an appeal, an inspector will give more weight to our decision if it's backed up by a supplementary planning document than if we didn't have one at all. Thank you.
Councillor Scott again.
So a couple of specifics then, which I won't name the shops or the place, but a fascia sign is up in place around above a shop. Clearly, you don't need planning permission to change the lettering on that fascia sign, but you might if you replaced it with a illuminated box sign. But I was told that adding illumination in the form of a ribbon of individual lights, a chain of lights, didn't need permission and wasn't covered by this. Another one is where a shop decides that it doesn't want to be a shop anymore and blanks out its window. Does that not need planning permission, etc.? There's plenty of specific cases which aren't specifically excluded from this policy. What's the best approach to do that, to check those out? Is it to refer each case to your planning officers, or is there some document which we could append which explains this in a bit more summary form so we can get the answers without bothering people all the time?
There is guidance available online. When it comes to things like window vinyls, that is a particularly complex area of advertisement consent, because a certain proportion of a window can be covered with window vinyl. And if there was a minor transgression, we would have to apply planning judgment and what we refer to as a public interest test as to whether it's justifiable to pursue that. We have to try and avoid applying our own personal taste, because what one person might find attractive and innovative and artistic, someone else might find distasteful and excessive. What the supplementary planning document aims to do is, again, provide some consistency. If you are concerned about a particular shopfront, then please contact the planning enforcement team or log an inquiry via the website, and we will investigate that on a case-by-case basis. And if we have applied some planning judgment, then we will be very happy to explain to you why we've decided either to pursue formal enforcement action or not in a particular case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking up so much of the committee's time, Madam Chair.
That's fine. Duncan, can you briefly say if you've done some enforcement work already as a result of the SPD, if your officers have spoken to some shops and if they have done amendments? Thank you.
The SPD has already informed negotiations and discussions. In the relatively short period of time since it was adopted, I'm not sure that we've specifically issued an enforcement notice, but if or when that becomes necessary, in the drafting of an enforcement notice, the reasons for issuing the notice have to be included within the notice, so the person receiving that notice is very clear why the council considered it justifiable, and we would reference both the local plan policy but also the SPD. So the answer to your question is most definitely yes.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Right, I can't see, oh, I was going to say I can't see any more, and then I saw two. I think Councillor Pingree was first.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for this document and thank you for bringing it back again, because I think I said last time it is absolutely beautiful and I loved reading it. And honestly, if it comes back to this committee again, I'd be happy with that too. So that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. First of all, I've noticed that there are quite a lot of barbers' poles illuminated now, where they also have illuminated fascias. Seems to be just creeping in at the moment. Are barbers' poles acceptable as far as planning, or would you want to be advised every time one is spotted or similar?
If there's a particular shop front, particular signage, particular illumination that's causing you concern, please let us know by preferably by email or via the website, and we will investigate each one of those. It's not necessarily, you'll appreciate, specific to barbers' shops, but I think it's just important that you are as much our eyes and ears as much as it is the planning officers and the planning enforcement officers being aware of what's happening and what's changing within the city. And sometimes shop fronts can change very, very quickly. So the sooner that we know about something, we try to stay vigilant, but the sooner we know about something, the better. It's just flagging this. If it's a concern to you, it will be a concern to us. Thank you.
Thank you, that's really useful. The other thing is that we don't, as councillors, get automatically notified if you serve an enforcement notice at the moment. Sometimes that might be quite useful to understand that an enforcement notice has been served so that we can be ready for anything that comes back from our community.
I'll take that point away, thank you.
Councillor Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, just on that point, I was notified of an enforcement notice. Is that something that I was lucky with then?
Very briefly, Chair, through you. I need to double check. I think we notify ward councillors for the ward wherever the notice has been issued, and we do maintain a register of enforcement notices. But I was a little bit hesitant a moment ago to mention that because I do just want to double check that. Yes, I will take that point away and let all committee members know what the process is currently. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to say it again. I can't see any more hands up. So this is a very similar recommendation, which is that this committee approves the draft Shops Fronts Guide SPD as set out in Appendix 1 for a 5-week public consultation, and authorises the Head of Planning and Economic Development, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of PED, to make necessary minor amendments to the draft Shop Fronts Guide SPD prior to the publication. Can I see hands in favour, please? Again, that's unanimous. Thank you. Duncan, thank you so much for doing all of this, and please pass our thanks on to Hannah, who's authored lots of these reports. Thank you. Okay, we move to the proposed committee scorecard, and that's you, Sian. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we'll give Duncan a rest temporarily. So it's that time of the year where we look ahead and consider the committee's work programme. And we obviously know that there are a number of matters that will come to you routinely in any event. So, for example, updates on Worcester Play Plan, active travel projects, updates on cultural activities, planning policy documents, as we know, will come through. So what the scorecard aims to do instead is to look at some of those more sort of perhaps time-limited pieces of work that you will want to track because they're not yet business as usual, or they are projects effectively. So there's a little bit of renaming and reframing, but all things you recognise, and in some instances it's because a funding stream has largely been delivered and there's one element left, for example. So if I just, Chair, would it be helpful if I just run through what the projects and activities are on the scorecard? Yeah. So to be retained is the design principles for Angel Place, but being really clear that now the opportunity to reinvest and redesign some interventions in Angel Place is being funded from at least 2 different sources. So it's not really useful anymore to call this a Future High Streets Fund element because we've got the cultural funding too. And talking to Chair in our briefing, we recognise that whilst the Policy and Resources Committee is looking after the sort of main Scala project, Angel Place is a placemaking project and should be looked after by PED. So you'll be aware already that we've committed to some local consultation and stakeholder engagement around Angel Place. You'll also be aware that there are a number of significant constraints on Angel Place, not least some of the ones that lie below ground level, and also its nature as highway, and also some budget constraints. So we don't have a blank sheet of paper with Angel Place, but there still is an interesting project to look at for this committee to sponsor and steer. So that's why that's just now described as Angel Place. Economic development strategy to be renamed as Sustainable Inclusive Growth Strategy, and I'm quite sure, councillors, whatever we call it, you'd just like to see it at this point, and I take that on board. And I think where we are now is to acknowledge that this plus the cultural strategy is about Worcester's opportunities, identity, and what's precious and what needs investing being articulated again prior to any reorganisation. So a sort of manifesto sort of documents which can be owned slightly wider than this local authority. I say manifesto, prospectus, those sorts of documents that we can share with partners and advocate for as we're asked to consider things like devolution opportunities, funding deals, other things we might like to bid for. So really the focus of the Sustainable Inclusive Growth Strategy will be to look at the economic opportunities that need safeguarding and developing across the city. It's not just about city centre, it's not just about retail, it's clearly about what a mixed picture our economy is across all of the wards. We've got significant areas of deprivation. We've got this government wanting to invest in a particular ward due to its economic and other aspects of deprivation. We've also got some great opportunities to celebrate the kind of outcome of some of our capital investment. So it's good time for an economic strategy, albeit one that's quite high level and isn't confined to a list of outcomes that only the City Council can deliver, because we don't want to fall into that trap. We don't have a whole heap of discretionary funding to address areas of strategic priority where this local authority might feel differently from another hypothetical local authority and want to invest money. We don't have that sort of ability anymore, I think, with our funding, but we do clearly have a lot of soft power still. And we are the only, as we know, local authority area that's currently looking after the city alone. So there's every reason to do the Sustainable Inclusive Growth Strategy. We will be using some consultancy support to do that, and we'll be expecting you to bring something to look at in the autumn. Town investment plan, we are still delivering under that. As you know, a substantial amount of the town investment funding went into one or two particular assets in Shrub Hill. The walking route is nearly open. The investment into Isaac Maddox House has been supported by Worcestershire County Council with a very recent decision to make an investment of their own. So, you know, that's still an active project. Shrub Hill regeneration clearly is a huge programme, could be, you know, a 20-year programme, but the local authority partners being at the table and Shrub Hill staying at the front of everyone's minds is the only way to lever in other substantial funding grants. So in the short term, this committee will be looking at Isaac Maddox House, for example, but there will be other aspects that can come forward. Town Investment Plan Active Travel, there is still an element of the active travel funding stream to deliver, not too much now, but there's some bike parking and bike racks, etc. So that's still on the scorecard for the time being. And Town Investment Plan Commandery, this was previously more broadly described as Heritage and Riverside. A number of aspects have now been delivered, but the relocation and curation of the Worcestershire Soldier Collection is the Commandery aspect that's still remaining. Going well, on course, but again, a specific project for you to be able to look at and hold us to account. Proposed new projects and activities. I've put the local plan, I mean, that hides a multitude of sins, as I'm sure we'd all agree tonight. I didn't quite know what else to call it, Duncan, so we went for local plan. The team who've worked so hard have just been rewarded with the arrival of the inspector's report, with also the news that they now need to start all over again. So again, local planning is a very good matter for this scorecard on an ongoing basis. Cultural strategy, again, similar to Sustainable Inclusive Growth Strategy, we think it's very relevant to have a cultural strategy that will support funding bids and move this local authority from being a funder of first resort, as our funding has reduced, to being a partner on match funding bids and opportunities where strategic opportunities can be aligned. If we do have funding next year for cultural activities in the city, to the extent that we've had some grant giving in the past that hasn't been competitively bid for, we'd like that to see that being competitively bid, and again a cultural strategy would support that. That's very much going to be informed by the piece of work that's concluding shortly on a cultural needs assessment. So we're looking at what does Worcester really need and how does culture play its part in delivering all of our city plan outcomes. Then we've got economic growth programme, and this really relates to the next item on the agenda. This is funding, again, on a discretionary basis, the District Council is choosing to make into, in this instance, Worcestershire Growth Hub in order to support businesses in Worcester. So that's something obviously to track and monitor during this coming year. A number of things have been removed from the scorecard because, as I said, they've either become business as usual or they're coming to an end. And as we know, unfortunately, UKSPF is coming to an end. The City Centre Transport Action Plan has gone on the removed list, and I'll let councillors comment on that if they wish. But I think in terms of what this committee can track and monitor, that's really why it's coming off the scorecard. And obviously it's a given that we have Worcester Show and Victorian Fair, etc. in our base budget, and we continue to deliver those. So, you know, in terms of KPIs, the KPIs that we measure are things that we think add value, that we can be interrogated on. We don't propose to add any new KPIs at this stage. And I also just want to note that the government in February announced a new monitoring and performance regime for local authorities, a local outcomes framework. So that's just mentioned in the covering report. It's important to note that many of those local outcomes framework targets are addressed at county councils, those which are addressed at district councils. In the report that's going to Policy and Resources Committee on the 24th of March, we talk about which ones of those local outcomes framework will be reported to Policy and Resources Committee. This is a long-winded way of me saying none of those are being reported to Place and Economic Development Committee. So all of the things on your scorecard and KPIs are things that this committee has decided it wants as useful things to measure, not being imposed from elsewhere. Clearly, what I would say is that going back a few years, we looked at our planning applications targets to make sure that they were really asking and measuring the same things as the government reporting. And they obviously do now. That keeps us safe, that keeps us out of special measures, and you know that Duncan has been assiduous in reporting those targets through to his team so that all members of the team know how important targets are. And as an example of that, we know the impact that it makes if householder applications are dealt with swiftly, and we know the impact that it makes if we can demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So I know you've seen quite a lot of this planning policy stuff coming through recently, but just the impact on the development management service is really important too. And in terms of where we are now, a few years into, under Dimkin's leadership, the improvements in the planning service, it's really important that these targets stay and that you hold us to account so that we can keep our performance up. Thank you, Chair. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sian. Before I take questions on the floor, I was just, the KPI for city centre footfall and number of retail units, when we looked at this in the briefing, it said data only, and I was expecting that then there would be some figures attached to that. Could you expand, please?
Sorry, Chair, I can't expand. That's an oversight. I'll need to come back on that. I will circulate a note for the committee. We do collect it. I don't know why it says data only. We should have the number in. Apologies.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor De Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say a couple of things? First of all, visitors to the city centre museums, the previous year and the target year, wow, that's a massive increase. That would be fantastic if they do that. I just wanted to be pleasantly shocked. But over the page, the KPIs for this year, they're all blank. Didn't quite understand that.
It's proposed that they're the same targets rolled over, Chair.
Oh, apologies. Should I have read that somewhere? Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I may have missed something, but the piece of work on accessibility, I thought that was part of this committee. Has that been removed now?
Not at all, no. It's a standing item that we have that report twice a year. It's part of the committee's work programme, as is play plan. So it's absolutely baked in, yeah.
Councillor Round, I want to give you my assurance that that absolutely is staying in. Councillor Alcott.
Yeah, thank you. I welcome the economic growth programme in particular, and I know with the economic development strategy to be renamed Sustainable and Inclusive Growth Strategy, we talk about bringing it back in the autumn. Are we using consultants or are we doing that in-house? It's just the next PED is autumn and it's November and it feels quite a long way away. And just one other question, if I may, just one. We've got, and apologies if I've missed this before, with the key PIs, we've got city centre footfall data only and number of empty retail units data only. Is there not a reason why we...
Yes. Alcott, we've just said that and that's an error.
Councillor Cooper's, spotted that, and those figures were supposed to have been updated before we went to print and they haven't, so I apologise and get that circulated. Yes, in relation to the production of the strategy, I know it has been, the date has moved. I think I'm just trying to be realistic, that clearly there's work to do between now and then. We can have seminars, we can share drafts, but in terms of the time it takes us to bring something through for approval, I think the autumn is realistic, to be honest.
Thank you.
Councillor Denham.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the key KPIs, it still refers to number of UK SPF business support grants awarded. Given that UK SPF has finished, will there be any delivery of that in the forthcoming financial year? Is there a kind of a hangover of funding or things still in train?
Through you, Chair, there is a very small hangover. It's only a few months long. We've been given an extended deadline, but it is only a few months long. We need to be able to account for all the funding and any underspends.
Thank you for that. I think the local outcomes framework from government has got an enormous amount in it, and there's an awful lot there to digest. Not all of it directly relevant to a district council, but some of it, a significant chunk is, and about encouraging sort of partnership working and working across boundaries. So there are some, it's one of the last sets, isn't it? Number 15. Economic prosperity and regeneration. I guess, you know, we don't have necessarily direct control of those, probably neither does anybody else. But will we be looking at those, because they are indicators that the government will be looking for that are relevant to economic growth and, you know, the sustainable and inclusive growth plan that we're looking to develop?
Through you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think it's actually, when you look at the list, it really goes again to the next agenda item, that if we're going to invest in the Worcestershire Growth Hub again for Worcester, then what data can be collected about the support that's given to businesses there? So in terms of the access that we would have, or any advice service would have to the business community as a whole, a good way to collect a set of data, not representative, but a kind of a cache of data would be to look at businesses who are engaging for advice and support. So that would provide some qualitative information on births of new enterprises, dramatic language, births of new enterprises, deaths of enterprises, business survival rate, business density, number of high growth enterprises. So to the extent that the Growth Hub supports those, that's an interface that we can report on. But it's an interesting indicator insofar as who, whether you were a lower or upper tier council or a unitary, who could collect that whole data set? You know, how would you go about collecting that whole data set? It's interesting, it's called a contextual outcome. So I think perhaps it's about, you know, what can you collect in those instances? That, similarly, later on, percentage of premises with gigabyte capable broadband coverage present with outdoor 5G coverage, and I know that's something we've discussed before at committee. We could do some samples and surveys, but how would we know, and how would any organisation collect a comprehensive suite? So we may be into some sampling territory, and these are absolutely the sorts of things that, if they're here to stay, our strategy can say, these are the sorts of things that we will keep our eye on. There are other things we'd want to keep our eye on too, aren't there, in terms of you know, the kind of pay differential within large and small organisations, and things like Corp B status and social value. So there are other things that we might like to measure, but these would be good things to say these are things that we're going to track with a new strategy. But I do question how any local authority could have full coverage of businesses, because they're not obliged to tell us. So it's an interesting point, and I think if we collect some sample information, trend information, then that's a good place to start.
Councillor Wilmore.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just checking I'm not getting my committees confused, because on the priority outcomes it said metrics in green are reflected in the performance scorecard, but they were the KPIs from Communities Committee. So is green what is going to happen across all committees, or specifically related to PED?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, sorry, this has caused some confusion. It is across all committees, and that's being wrapped up in the overall report that goes to Policy and Resources Committee. I checked that as we sat here tonight. It says in the covering report for PED, none of the local outcomes framework measures are sitting directly on the PED committee scorecard this year.
Councillor Scott.
Having looked at these for the first time, I think we should welcome the government's intervention in identifying some key indicators of how well we are doing as a place, as a city, and the contribution that Worcester can make to the overall economic prosperity of the country, which is what this is all about. I think the government actually said in the guidance, it says that the government will be identifying the scores on this, will be measured against them, and I'm sure there's a debate about what's collected. The key one on the economic prosperity is probably gross value added per hour worked, which is a measure of general productivity, which is the British disease that our productivity has been lagging behind the rest of a large part of the developed world. So whatever steps we can contribute to do that, I think will be supportive, and local authorities, by being given these set of targets, are being recognised as a key part of the economic change which the country so badly needs. So I think we should be welcoming the local authorities, the recognition that we're given on there. And we should be measuring the projects we undertake against these indicators, but it won't only be us who do them, and particularly the growth of enterprises. There are other things other than funding specific projects we can do. So we haven't talked about the range of accommodation which is available in the city for new businesses to set up, and that's a key part of what businesses are allowed to work in the city. And we know that there are businesses in the model economy who haven't been able to find space in the city and have had to move outside the boundaries. So generally I welcome these, and I think we'd look forward to it over the coming years.
Thank you, Chair. And just to respond and agree that where we have made an intervention, whether because we've had external funding or because it's been a political priority, that's exactly where we can collect qualitative and quantitative data and show the value that we've added. And it's a really good narrative then for further investment, I think. And I think that needs to form part of the corporate memory as well, with the change that's ahead for us. And I think that needs to form part of the articulation of what role does the local authority play in a new sustainable growth strategy. So we can say, for example, that, I mean, there are some really interesting examples that have come out through our projects. We won't necessarily write them into the strategy in this granular level of detail, but you might all remember that the Shopfront Improvement Scheme, that element of the Future High Streets Fund grant for Angel Place, the Cross, etc. One of the things that we learnt, and they were small grants to small businesses, which we hadn't expected, was what a lot of people wanted was funding to spend on their roofs. Because once they could repair their roof with our grants, they could then do the work to let the upstairs out for new residential accommodation. So it's a really interesting piece of qualitative information we didn't know when we went into that scheme. You know, in terms of the outputs that we were able to deliver with quite small sums of money, that was really satisfying. And I think similarly, what we know in terms of, say, for example, arts and culture, is that we should now be collecting and measuring the kind of health and well-being outcomes that come with being able to participate in social events and cultural events. So, you know, in terms of being able to measure some quantitative but definitely qualitative change, I think we've got a really good story to tell in Worcester, and that has been one of the benefits of us working at just the city level, which we don't want to lose when it's a larger local authority administrative area. And I think, you know, obviously we've had feedback from councillors about things that they hear in terms of how the retail sector feels in the city centre about the actions of the council sometimes, you know, what goes well, what doesn't go well, the ripples it has. And I think that that's a really good thing for us to understand, and a bit of legacy about, well, what value can we add even with small amounts of money. I think that's really, really valuable.
Councillor Collier.
Thank you, Chair. It's like you teased out on me, Sian. If I may ask about the City Centre Transport Action Plan, and wasn't going to. Just the reasoning behind the removal in the due to be completed section. I was just wanting to inquire what it was that the completion refers to, and where, for example, some of the city-led project delivery plan actions, where do they then fall? Because those haven't all been completed, I don't believe. Where's it going?
Through you, Chair, I'll do my best, and then if anybody around the table wants to come in and help me, they're welcome. I think where we are is that we had some funding allocated to support the city centre transport strategy. We have deployed our resources, supported the development of a strategy. The implementation of the strategy with all those aspects which are a highways function are, we have limited power to take that forward. We have an active travel work stream which sits within this committee, which will continue. And I think that there are no further actions that I think I suppose as officers feel we can take at the present time with the city centre transport strategy. So I mean, if we can reframe that as a specific action that we can take forward, then we could take it forward as a priority for this committee, but it's difficult to know what we're asking that we can do as a committee. And I think that's really what we were trying to focus the scorecard on, was things that could feed the work programme.
On that, I think it's been through 3 heads of highways now, and none of them have responded from County Council. So my plea as Vice Chair of this committee would be to the county councillors around the table to continue to put pressure on the heads of highways, to recognise that Worcester has a big economic development contribution, and we would like this recognised. This is work that we've paid for, and it's a very well thought out plan, which we would love to see fruition. Councillor Denham.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that, Chair. In a sense, it's with sadness that I get the logic of removing it from this committee. I'm not normally a member of this committee. And yeah, the actions within it, that as a district council, we can't deliver those recommendations other than, the active travel ones. But it is very much, it remains a really important aspiration for Worcester City. And interestingly, Councillor Scott and I were asked separately by Worcester News to comment on a series of traffic accidents that had occurred on Foregate Street between pedestrians and vehicles, and we independently responded, and we both of us referenced the importance of the undelivered city centre transport action plan.
Councillor Scott. Okay, if I don't see any more hands.
Just in terms of the recommendation, it's obviously...
So the recommendation is that the Place and Economic Development Committee consider the proposed scorecard for PED performance scorecard for 26-27. Obviously, we've spotted some errors within that with the data for empty retail units and footfall. So that will be in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair. Can I see hands in favour? Lovely, it's unanimous. We've all considered that. And finally, we move to the enterprise and skills support. Sean, can I just clarify that there is a typo within this, and it is the Worcestershire Growth Hub?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think really, in terms of the terminology throughout the report, the Worcestershire Growth Hub is the advice service that you can find branded on the internet as the Worcestershire Growth Hub. I think what our report author, the Managing Director, meant was the Worcester element of the Worcestershire Growth Hub. So I think the best way to actually look at number 1 is that it talks about agrees to the preferred option and allocation, etc. And I think it should say for funding of Worcester businesses, or something like for funding of the Worcestershire Growth Hub. Worcestershire Growth Hub for investment in Worcester is probably best. Okay. So for funding of the Worcestershire Growth Hub for investment in Worcester. And I think that's what's intended. This is for Worcester outputs. But you're absolutely right, technically, and that should be throughout the document, it's actually called the Worcestershire Growth Hub, but the proposal is for investment in Worcester. Chair, so this report is talking about keeping some continuity going for funding support for the Growth Hub. The report rehearses the background that the Growth Hub's been, the Growth Hub's been established since 2016 through different funding streams. The district councils have contributed to the funding of the Growth Hub, as obviously have the county council, who have the primary responsibility in this area. The district councils have used in recent years UK Shared Prosperity Fund to support the Growth Hub, and obviously this committee's had oversight of that. That's true of Worcester as well. And obviously with UK SPF becoming unavailable, we've had and us setting our budget, we've had the challenge around what's affordable to continue. In the same space, the government have changed some of the funding streams nationally, and as things have settled down, it's become a little bit clearer which elements are funded under different national programmes now. and it's become clear that the Department for Business and Trade is securing some ongoing funding for the Growth Hub. So there is some funding for Growth Hubs. It represents a reduction in funding from circa 700,000 to 331,000. So, you know, if the district councils didn't continue to put in additional support to the Growth Hub, that difference would be felt at a local level. The report also recognises that there's a new funding stream for careers support and NEET support. So the report in the alternative options section says if the district council wanted to make an ongoing investment in skills and there were other options other than Growth Hub, which there are, what would be the advantages and disadvantages of those? And the report recommends that overall the most impact can be had by continuing to invest in Growth Hub on Worcestershire outcomes. The report talks about what the outputs have been. So in sections 3.1, you've got overall Worcestershire outputs, and then Worcester outputs at 3.3. And also, I can update that since the report was written, we have got confirmation that all the districts are continuing to invest in the Growth Hub. So Malvern Hills and Wychhaven are putting in 70,000, and Wyre Forest the same, and Redditch and Bromsgrove the same. Those numbers aren't all confirmed and voted through yet for all those districts, but they're all in, all provision has been made. We also wanted some confirmation from the LEP about their ongoing commitment, and they've provided a response that explores all of the different skills programmes and business support programmes they give, as opposed to a specific number for Growth Hub on its own. Their overall investment plan is about £2 million, but that's not just for Growth Hub. So the proposal in investing in Growth Hub on an ongoing basis is to make sure that we are really actively measuring the Worcester targets. We talked just under the last agenda item about some of those new government targets that we'd want to keep our eyes on. But there's also something about connecting this to employment and employability and younger people coming into the jobs market. And we know that the Careers Hub are keen to work with us and the Growth Hub to make sure that younger people are signposted and matched with businesses who may have opportunities to grow and give them some sort of careers exposure. So it's not that it's not exclusive that the Careers Hub won't benefit from ongoing support to the Growth Hub. The proposal is that this is for 1 year's worth of funding, £50,000. It will be built into the medium-term financial plan, but it's Office's recommendation that we see how this performs, that you need to see what the Worcester outputs are, and you need to be satisfied that you've got visibility of where that money's going and what it's doing for Worcester. So it's only a 1-year allocation at this stage with a funding agreement with specific outputs. Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Larger selection of hands. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. On 3.1, there's a whole list of results, if you like, including at county level 216 jobs created. But under 3.3, the jobs figure is missing. Every other figure relates across to the county, but there isn't a figure for jobs. Is that because we didn't get any jobs, or whether it's just been missed off?
Through you, Chair, yes, we've spotted the same point. I mean, I assume that the number has been collected and it's just not been made available to us. So I think going into the contract, obviously, we'd want that number on the table and it would be one of our output measures. I will find out what it is and circulate it.
Thank you. Councillor Wilmore.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you have got any thoughts, Sean, on the key challenge identified by the Careers Hub, and it said it's one of employer engagement, and there's a need for more local employers to put vacancies into the hub to provide employment and apprentice opportunities, because what they've done so far is impressive, isn't it? I think it was sort of 40% of people that they had supported had progressed into employment. And is there anything that we can sort of leverage with the sort of big organisations that we have regular contact with, or getting involved with some of the business networking sort of companies that are around to try and promote this a little bit more? It's, you know, it's identified the challenge, but I'm wondering if there's anything that we can offer to contribute towards finding a solution to that.
Thank you. It's a good challenge. The difficulty we'd have at the district council is capacity now. We don't have a resource base that could advocate for this, and that's really what we've got to make sure the Growth Hub does, and we've got to really hold them to account to make sure that they are pursuing Worcester businesses and trying to match that with Worcester young people and people looking for jobs generally. That's the choice that we would make with this funding. Instead of funding a post ourselves, we wouldn't have the resource ourselves to do that piece of work, so we'd have to rely on the Growth Hub to do that. And this is why I say this is a one-year contract to really count the the outputs and the outcomes for Worcester and check that that is really happening.
Councillor Pingree.
Thank you, Chair. My question was basically the same question as Councillor Barnes. It would be nice to see some impact back from the businesses in a way, because I've heard from businesses who have benefited from either this scheme or similar schemes, and anecdotally they said it's been really good for us, but it'd be nice to get that come back to this committee to show where our money's gone, essentially.
Chair, I mean, I think if it'd be helpful, we've had it before, but it would be beneficial to have a presentation from the Growth Hub that they focus on Worcester, and they tell you, like almost coming out of this previous year and going into the next one, what their observations and reflections on Worcester are, and they may feel settled now they've got the funding base agreed across all the councils, that it's a good time to tell you that, and it's not so, it's a settled position. So if that's something that'd be helpful, we can either do that as a seminar or at the next scheduled meeting. They've come before and I think people did find it helpful. Happy to sort that out.
I think that might be good as an all-member briefing, actually, because then we could all shout about the work they're doing.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Scott.
Yes, in 5.2, you refer to a funding agreement that will be put in place. Who with? What is the Business Hub? Is it a company, or is it the LEP, or who? And how will that work? What will the funding agreement say? We give you this much money in return for you delivering this agreed outcomes and outputs, presumably. And what say in the governance of the hub do we have?
Through you, Chair. So the situation is that the LEP is established as a legal entity, but the accountable body for the LEP is still the County Council. The employment of the Growth Hub colleagues is actually it's hosted by Worcester City Council due to an arrangement put in place a couple of years ago. We would expect to have a funding agreement in place with Worcestershire County Council to make sure that, because that's really where the governance sits for the overall target setting for Worcestershire Growth Hub, and the prioritisation that the Growth Hub has to make to meet all of its customers. You've probably seen, if you look at their website, they have account managers for different areas. I would expect that there would be a funding agreement in place with the County Council, who've got the overall. They've had that, if you like, that core allocation from the government that I referred to, albeit now it's only 330, but they've had that core allocation for Growth Hubs. That's the underpinning money. Our money tops that up. I would expect our agreement to be with the County Council to talk about what we want the Worcester money to buy.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yes, I agree. It would be a really good idea if we could have a visit so we could ask questions, and it would be really useful. So looking at 3.3, I mean, my concern is, and I might be sounding really thick here, but what does business engagement mean? Does that mean somebody rings up and asks an inquiry? What do you do? Okay, and they give them that, this is what we're about. Okay, that's number one. Is it a business engagement? Okay, who do I ring for this, that and the other? Do they then signpost them, and then do they count that as another in the number of the 595? Similarly with business visits, what is that? I mean, I can guess what it might mean, but it's not very clear from this. And similarly, strategic business visits. What's the difference between a business visit and a strategic business visit? Another word, but it doesn't clarify what exactly that they're doing, and it sounds great. Business support referrals made. That looks really impressive. What on earth is that? Is that just giving someone a leaflet and signposting them? What are these descriptions? What are they specifically? I know I could interpret them and everybody around here could interpret them as to what they mean, but I think we need a bit more meat to understand exactly what we're getting for the money, really. And I know it's only for 1 year, but it's still a lot of money, and I think we'd like to see, I would like to see exactly what is the money being spent on and have a bit more detailed data, really.
Through you, Chair. I think that's a very fair comment, and I think that we've got to recognise that business engagement does mean often a touch point and a conversation, definitely. And I suppose that's measured at a global scale because it would then be a choice for the business as to whether to engage further and pursue further advice. I agree, more clarity would be beneficial. It's also really important that we don't just measure outputs, that we measure outcomes. And that we don't just drive high numbers in order to report on them, that we can show that meaningful change. And I think that's where the kind of almost the annual report type approach comes, where you've got the narrative, where you can tell the stories as well that have made a real difference, as well as just some of the general numbers. I think really overall, I just would agree with the sentiment around the table that a presentation that drills into this, digs into this, as a sort of scrutiny item, would be a really, really, really useful exercise as we move into the next year.
Very much agreed. Councillor De Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I've got one point that probably could easily deal with. 1.1 says 26 to 26. What does that, is that supposed to be 27? Someone had to be Alex Mace, and that was me today. But
yes, yes.
But more seriously, so that you want to, this investment is only being made for a year because we want to check it out. Is there a downside to that? That any, you know, a little bit like we saw with the Dawn project that was staggering from 1 year to the next, and then you lose staff. I just wanted to put the question really.
I think it is a fair question, and I think I suppose what we're trying to do is signal our ongoing commitment by putting it in our medium-term financial plan, as the other districts have done, but to say we want to understand the Worcester impact. The funding picture settled quite late in the day, I think, in terms of what are the national funding streams and what are they directed towards. What does the county council want to do? What does the LEP want to do? The LEP holds reserves. What's the LEP doing with its reserves? I think that this money keeps us at the table, and it is important that that is there's a bit of friendly challenge around that, being at the table and seeing the outputs for Worcester, but obviously as a partner wanting to be counted in the service planning going forwards. So it's not like we would wait till the end of this funding year to decide what we're going to do next. We want to just have a more ongoing conversation about whether we're getting value, and then obviously whether we keep the allocation going. I think there is always a risk when you fund something year to year, but we are in those times at the moment, and we've got to justify all our spend. And where we have this discretionary allocation that's matched from county and district, we really need to keep our eye on that, I think, and understand that our money is really, as I say, buying some Worcester outcomes. So, you know, I don't think the door's closed on ongoing funding. I think it's just about keeping the conversation going.
Thank you, Councillor De Sarah. I will, when I do the recommendation, I'll make sure that's changed, and I know Alex Mace is watching, so he'll appreciate that. Councillor Denham.
Thank you very much, Chair. As one of the people that's been in the room in negotiations, discussions, conversations around some of this, so there's been quite a lot of meetings across Worcestershire with leaders of district councils or the economic kind of cabinet member and chief execs. I haven't been in every meeting, but the fact that there have been quite a few is indicative that it's not been easy to get to this point, and actually the negotiations have been the history of working together on this agenda hasn't been all that good, and if you like, levels of trust between organisations and delivery is part of the problem. The last government said that LEPs should be disbanded and replaced with growth hubs or something that maybe looks more like that. And the current government have repeated the same advice. At the present time, the county council are still retaining the LEP structure, and as districts we've struggled. We haven't all had a place at the table, and we've struggled to kind of influence what the LEP was doing. I think it's worth noting, you know, and I had a conversation with the manager for the Growth Hub, it may only have been last week. Those criteria are difficult to understand and not what we would like them to be, but they are the criteria that have been set by government in the past for growth hubs. So it has been just about, if you like, counting contacts. Obviously, I presume there's a level of definition behind the different contacts. And the growth hub, they are awaiting the up-to-date guidance for the criteria and what they've to count in the forthcoming financial year. You might like to think or hope that there might be some recognisable match to the government outcomes framework, but I don't think we can be certain that that will be the case. We are, if you like, lucky in Worcester that we have the careers hub, and that, you know, it's located in the Hive, and there is, you know, different agencies brought together that are delivering that. With the reduced funding or the change in funding, as it says in the paper here, the Worcester one is being funded, and the achievements are notable and valued. Redditch is also retaining a physical presence, but other districts at the present time, or the first offer, if you like, from the LEP, that there wasn't funding for that. There is particularly in parts of the county concern about increasing numbers of young people not in education or employment, and there is a meeting coming up to talk around that in detail. There is also, I think, since, you know, the agreement and these conversations have been taking place, the government have recently announced additional funding, new funding streams, which is about encouraging employers to take on young people not in education or training, and, you know, a funding element to encourage employers to do so. So it is a continually sort of developing situation in terms of potential funding streams and initiatives that are needed, and that will, you know, impact on our community and our residents. So it's important that as a district council we're part of those conversations and, you know, do our best to maximise those opportunities within the city.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really helpful as well just to think about the context in terms of new funding streams coming on board all the time, and I think that's why we're trying to signal we've got a partnership commitment, but we do really want to understand where the funding sits, who's got what funding, so that there aren't any gaps, but we aren't funding the same thing twice or counting things for the sake of it. And I think perhaps we all have that feeling around the table, so that's good. And I think making sure that we stay close to the colleagues who deliver the service is one of the best ways to do that. So we'll get the sort of seminar set up and take it forward on that basis.
Thank you. I'm conscious we're getting towards the 9 o'clock mark and we'd normally have a comfort break, but I've only got 2 more speakers, so if you can bear with us, we're so near the end. I ask you to keep it as brief as you can. Councillor Collier.
Yeah, super brief from me. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I agree with lots of what's been said around the table, but just wanted to voice my support for this initiative. It's so hard out there if you're a startup or you're a small business. And if we want to support innovation and creativity in our city, then this is exactly the sort of commitment that I like to see our council being able to provide. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your brevity. Councillor Barnes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we also need to see how businesses have grown as a result of what's happening with the hub, whether turnover's gone up as a consequence of being supported, income, whether there's been investment that's come in, maybe from abroad. No, have they done anything? I know that the LEPs are much more in that area, but LEPs don't always have the same priorities as City Council. And I do think that we need to understand more about how proactive they are in inward investment, outward investment to the city, so that we can actually judge them in the full. Because at the moment, just because they've hosted an occasion, that doesn't really mean anything.
Right, I can't say any more. Every time. Councillor Denham.
Sorry, I just realised an additional point that I wanted to make, which is, you know, in paragraph 2.9, we refer to arts and cultural events and refer to the community grants. I think that is to actually completely undersell what this district council does in contributing to arts and culture, and that as part of, you know, the economy, visitor economy within the city. You know, the fact that we support our museums, we run our museums and have a really active profile of, you know, activities, events, engaging with communities, support for a variety of festivals that are not part of that, the community grants, what we're doing with the Scala, our engagement with Visit Worcestershire. So those are all, you know, engines, part of economic development. And I suppose that hasn't always been recognised by the likes of the LEP, but absolute, and that's part of the reason that as a city we do deliver those, and they are really important contributions to the local sustainable economy.
Okay, I am now moving to the recommendation. Please listen carefully because we've a few tweaks. So that this committee agrees the preferred option set out in section 3, an allocation of £50,000 for 2026 to 2027 funding of the Worcestershire Hub for investment in Worcester. Delegates responsibility for contracting arrangements, including output targets, to the Corporate Director of Economic Development, Planning and Governance, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of PED. Can I see hands in favour, please? Lovely, and that's unanimous again. We don't have any other business, but I would like to take this opportunity very quickly to thank David Blake for all his contributions to this committee over the years. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.